Webinar. Today's topic is well-being and productivity. This is the third in our series of home working webinars, so where we've been focusing at looking at the main topics affecting businesses related to home working and actually hybrid working now. As far as the format's concerned, this is a conversation. We call it coffee table conversations. Very much, we've got a panel of experts that we ask a number of questions to and get their responses on that. So it's very much a conversation, a debate. There's an opportunity to ask questions yourselves. If you look at the Q&A at the bottom, you can ask a question at any point of the session. We will endeavour to answer those questions. If we can't manage to get to answering your question, we'll make sure we get back to you after the session with a response. We're also going to run a few polls, which we'll be able to get some information on how you as businesses are operating currently, and that will feed into the conversations that we're going to have. I'm just going to now introduce our expert panel. I'm going to start off with Nick. Would you like to just introduce yourself and give us a bit of your background?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Nick Bishop and the name of my business is Nick Bishop Solutions. Before working for myself over the last 15 years, I was a contact centre manager for HBOS, managing about 250 people, both in outbound and inbound telesales. Most of my work is around developing peak performance within teams and organisations. And I consider myself quite fortunate that's morphed into sport as well, because ultimately people are just people and teams are just teams.
Great. Andy?
Sure. Thanks very much, Jonathan. My name's Andy Barker. I am one of the founders of a training company called Mind Fitness. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second, but my background is corporate. So I was one of the first people on board at Sony's PlayStation many moons ago, and I set up and ran their consumer services division, which obviously grew from just a few seats to a really very huge operation. So a big passion of mine is around contact centres and video games, but also around mental health and well-being, and that's something I care a lot about, and hence setting up Mind Fitness. A little bit of a kind of background on Mind Fitness is we look at training people in mental health and understanding and awareness of mental health, well-being, so in other words how you can improve and ensure that you have good mental health, and then around that personal effectiveness, and everything we do is evidenced in science. We use mindfulness and cognitive behavioural therapy as a platform, and that's me.
Great, thank you, Andy. Eileen?
Hi, hello everyone. My name's Eileen and I am the founding director of Ripple & Co. My background is also corporate. I spent about 20 years in the corporate sector, latterly as a global director of a FTSE 250. And my roles were predominantly in corporate responsibility and sustainability. So I left the corporate sector about 3 years ago and I founded a company because of my belief that the investment that companies make in their human capital is one of their key corporate responsibilities. And the business case for doing that, I'm sure we'll touch on some of that today, is absolutely solid in terms of why you would do it and the return on that investment. So now Ripple & Co. develop bespoke, evidence-informed strategies and develop programs, support on the implementation of those programs around corporate health, corporate mental health, and corporate well-being. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some of that evidence with you and some of the insight that we can gain from that evidence so we can turn it into action.
Brilliant. Thank you. Hello, Eileen. Lynda? Can you hear? Yeah.
I was on mute. Yeah, I just realised. I'm Lynda Campbell. I had a background in utilities for many years. So, 20 odd years as a head of and director in British Gas in the UK. Background in contact centres and lots of leadership experience and transformation experience. I left British Gas 5 years ago and set up my own business, Service Culture Club, working with organisations on leadership and culture. Are the two things that really interest me. I've just finished a year with BA as well as head of their global transformation, so dealt with many of the outsourced companies. But my particular interest over the last year, I work with another training company called Call of the Wild, is all around remote leadership. And I guess the big thing for me, having worked and talked to many companies recently, it's not what you do as a leader in leading remotely, it's how you do it needs to change. And so that's kind of my interest area today.
Great, thank you, Lynda. Okay, so thanks for the introductions, guys. So just to frame the debate, obviously well-being has become very much a hot topic in the last 12 months, particularly because of the advent of COVID and the pandemic. But even before that, I think businesses were starting to realise the importance of certainly employee well-being. But at the same time, it's great thinking or putting it on the agenda, but the main thing is making sure you're putting those actions in place and you're doing it properly. And there are a lot of challenges which home working has thrown at many businesses. So hopefully, and through this discussion today, we'll be answering a few of your questions on that. But I'm going to start off by asking Eileen a question around how much of an issue well-being is within the workplace currently. We've got a few stats from the poll actually, which are coming in as well, so which are quite interesting in themselves. So you may want to sort of reference as well, Eileen.
Cool. So I'm just going to reflect on what you said at the beginning, Jonathan, that I think we do and we did know that well-being and specifically mental health were becoming issues in the workplace. So both Deloitte and Accenture and many, many others had started to do reports on this, which were really quantifying the cost that it was having to UK PLC in terms of the mental ill health, which was having a knock-on impact on productivity. So Deloitte in January 2020 estimated that cost was up to 45 billion per annum to UK PLC. Now that of course was pre-pandemic. And what we're really looking at there is the fact that there is a causal link. There is a direct link between our well-being and our productivity. And one of the pieces of evidence that we can turn to for this is one that actually was done in call centres. It was a BT call centre. It was 1.8 million staff. So we've got a really good sample size there. And what they found was by tracking their happiness levels, not even well-being, as fluffy as happiness, over the course of 6 months on a weekly basis, they found that there was an uplift in sales when people were reporting happier states of mind. So we know there is a direct link. So we know that it's an issue for that reason. The pandemic has brought that into a much, much sharper focus. And some of the statistics around why the pandemic has had an impact are around the fact that we have never recorded the levels of anxiety that we have recorded during that pandemic. They have gone off the scale, predominantly in younger workers. So this is worth reflecting on your actual workforce demographics. It's the younger workers who have suffered the most in terms of anxiety and feelings of loneliness. But just generally across the population, we have seen a doubling in feelings of low happiness. And we know that happiness is linked to well-being, and well-being, of course, is linked to productivity. So yeah, it's a big issue, and it's one that we will see increasing when we feel the effects of what is being called the shadow pandemic, the echo pandemic of mental ill health that's going to follow COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Andy, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, echo really what Eileen has said. You know, there's now more research to back that up, that the cost to society, the cost to businesses. Even 2017, the Thriving at Work report estimated the cost to UK PLC was £99 billion a year. So if you apply what that may look like now with a pandemic in full force, it is a serious issue and something we all have to address. You know, from the work I do, the two real challenges we've got is increased levels of anxiety that's going through the roof, and with it depression. And the two things sit absolutely side by side, and so it's supporting people and giving them coping strategies and making sure that we're much more aware and open about these challenges, because yes, there is a cost, but there is a benefit if you support people. As Eileen says, the benefit is huge, and some estimates have said for every pound you spend on support, you get between 4 and 10 back. So there is a very well established cost benefit to supporting better mental health and better well-being in the workplace.
Yeah, and how do you spot sort of the warning signs of a distressed worker? Anything to sort of look out for particularly?
Well, and if you're talking about in the remote sense, you know, in this environment, in the Zoom environment, it can be very, very tricky. But there are all sorts of things you can spot. You're looking for changes. So if you're aware that somebody is normally quite talkative and they become less so, somebody's less involved, so they don't get involved in the sort of day-to-day stuff that, you know, the sort of less formal meetings, those are warning signs. If somebody appears more distracted than usual, sometimes it's not just about what somebody's saying, but how they're saying it. They may be saying, I'm fine, but everything about them is showing that they're not fine. So there are ways, but it can be incredibly difficult because there's a mask that people can put on to hide where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Lynda, as far as sort of avoiding isolation and creating a sort of collaborative working environment, what's your thoughts or what's your advice on that?
So I was thinking this through when we talked about doing this webinar, and there's almost three things at play here, which all have to come together, and then two further ones that underpin it. So you've got the sort of personality of the person that's working from home and their kind of applicability to work from home, because not everybody has the capability to work from home in terms of what's inside them. You've got the leadership style of the people who support them. You've got the physical environment they're moving into, they're working from. And the companies I've been working with lately, I've seen all sorts of things, people lying on beds trying to work from home, tiny little spaces, lots of youngsters still living at home. You've got all that environment piece. Then you've got this whole thing of how supportive you are as a team, that the whole team, because that needs to be bigger and better than ever. And then finally, the last one I kind of understood can be an issue is the type of work somebody is doing. So particularly some of our people who may be talking to customers who are in debt, say, and they're managing a debt issue. So you imagine taking that type of work, you're in this tiny little environment, you may have an unsupportive leader or a leader that doesn't know how to reach out and connect in a virtual way. And you also might have the personality style that actually doesn't suit remote leadership. And it's almost like a perfect storm. So we're talking about well-being and mental health, but we have to get some factors right before we should have to reach out on any of those issues. And if those sort of 5 things are not in play and not working with each other, then we're causing this real issue to ourselves. So the bit for me is that you have to overemphasize collaboration, overemphasize reaching out to people, and letting people know they care. Because the other thing is that when you look around you, when you have an issue, there's no one to go to. You don't have your colleagues sat next to you that can help you with that support.
Yeah, absolutely. So what sort of areas are critical to improving employee wellbeing? Nick, I thought you could give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, when I saw the topic for this webinar, it made me think, and what it made me realize is that lots of the things I'm going to tell you about very briefly should be in place in the first place, but probably aren't. And when I looked at the 4 or 5 what I would call pillars, it almost mapped into Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it's kind of where we should be. So I'm looking at health, for example, and we talk about physical and mental health, which is part of the process today. But also under health, I'm thinking workload as well. And do we put too much workload on people as well? We then move on to security and, you know, what kind of conditions are people working in? But also we look upon financial security and salary and perks and conditions. But in terms of the security and conditions, we then move into environment, the facilities that people work in. Have they got the right tools to do the job? And also under environment, I'd even put culture down there as well. What is our culture in our business? Is it a healthy culture? Then we think about relationships, and I'm talking about with your line manager. Do you get support? Do you get direction? But also in terms of relationships with your peer group, with your team, a teamship type of ethos. And finally, purpose. is the job fit right, and is the progression in place for the person, the individual? And the final point I'd make, it's interesting to see that whenever unemployment rises, street gangs increase. And the only thing I'm relating to is people want a sense of belonging, to be part of a team.
Yeah.
So don't underestimate, when we talk about a well-being, the importance of a teamship society.
Yeah, really good point, Nick. So Eileen, what's your thoughts?
I think that's absolutely fascinating, this idea that this sense of belonging is really needed, this sense of purpose. But also you get relationships from work. And what Nick was really describing there is the 5 ways, the 5 drivers, not the 5 ways to wellbeing, the 5 drivers of wellbeing, which are, again, evidence-based, that there are 5 key drivers of wellbeing in the workplace. Interestingly, health and relationships come top in that list. So for me, probably one of the most important factors, in fact, I'm going to say the most important factor, is relationships. So we know from research out of Oxford Research Centre that 86% of our job satisfaction is going to come from the relationship we have with our line manager. So we know that is probably the most important factor when it comes to our well-being. 75% of us would say that actually our boss is the most stressful part of our working life. Yeah. And yet 70% of our motivation comes from our manager. So there's a real sort of contradiction going on all the time. So I think you've got a lack of relationship because we've now transferred to a more virtual way of working. We've also got the fact that many line managers are promoted into that role because they're technically good at their jobs. I was delivering some training to 500 line managers at BP, and there were some amazing people on those sessions, but not all of them had the ability to be able to have that empathetic, supportive conversation with a colleague who might not be doing okay. That is now quite clearly, it is part of a line manager's role. They have to be able to look after the well-being, or at least notice and then support an employee who isn't doing very well. So I'm just going to put myself out there and say it's relationships, and it's the relationship we have with our line manager that's the most critical. Yeah.
Okay. Andy, what's your thoughts?
Well, totally agree. And when you pare down the whole communication thing, and it's creating rapport, all the things we do in an office, those water cooler moments, it's very difficult now. Everything we do has to be kind of instigated. You can't just wander off and get a cup of coffee and bump into a colleague and have a chit chat that might lead to something, ideas or whatever. So I think that's very difficult. But paring it right back, communication in a way that it can be open and honest, communication that's full of compassion, communication where people can be themselves. And that's really important. I think this is now where we've got to head to, so that we're not in a situation where we don't want to tell people how we feel openly and honestly because we don't want to be judged. So it is, and also line managers who are able to have open conversations with people who may say, look, I'm struggling and I need some support and help. And that's scary if somebody reveals that. So I think we've got to move into a new phase now where people have the right level of understanding, of knowledge, of training, of confidence, and culture really is about developing an environment where we can be open and know that we're not going to be judged and not going to be stigmatized and even discriminated against. I think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Lynda, you?
Yeah, I mean, the more I think about it, I think we'll move to a hybrid sort of version. I'm not sure solely working from home is the way forward. Although I think it'll depend on company. I have to agree with Eileen around the leadership elements, and it's what I've noticed the most as I've been doing, working with companies and training. What I've noticed is whether we have the right skills as leaders in this over exaggeration of the way that we need to reach out to people. Maybe it's the wrong use of words, over exaggeration, but it needs to feel to somebody like that we are reaching out, we are talking, we are supporting. The piece I've been exploring is about how you also build this culture of collaboration or team code of collaboration, which is you don't just get your support from your leader, you get your support from your team. And the fact that they're not sat next to you now is a really big deal. So what is it that team need to explore differently as well in the way that they reach out to each other and they support each other? And that is kind of, you know, alongside how we as leaders will lead in the virtual world.
Yeah, absolutely. You've actually touched on something else I was going to ask later, actually, regarding how managers, or tips for managers who are managing remote teams and that disconnect. So it's obviously it's a challenge in itself, and maintaining that is so important. I mean, just around. A lot of businesses are looking at sort of implementing a network of health first aiders. Is that something which you think is a good thing, Eileen?
I'm going to say in the main, yes, as long as it's part of a more strategic approach and as long as it's integrated into other support mechanisms. And what I mean by that, so we know that peer-to-peer support really works. There's evidence of that. We also know that if those who are doing the support have their own lived experience, then that makes them more effective. I'm doing some research into mental health first aiders at the moment because I'm looking to develop products that can then support these mental health first aiders. And what I've found is that 75% of them across lots of different large organizations have their own experience of mental ill health, either direct or indirectly. So yes, that makes them effective, but it also makes them vulnerable to being triggered, vulnerable to their own mental ill health, either reoccurring or being exacerbated. So I think, yes, mental health first aiders or champions or ambassadors is a great idea. They need to be vertically integrated into an organization, not just all clumped together either, you know, at that sort of lower management level, which tends to happen, but vertically integrated throughout an organization. But they themselves need to be supported as well. The duty of care needs to be extended to all employees, including the first aiders. And these guys need support. So one of the things that I'm finding in the research is that quite often in their passion to support and help people, their colleagues, they're overstepping the mark. They're moving into counselling and advising. The mental health first aider is there to support and signpost. That is it. That isn't what's happening in many cases because they so want to help because they don't want that person to experience the pain that they have or that they do. So yes, it's a good idea, but I so advocate that it's in an integrated way, in a strategic way, and you look at how you can support them. And if you want to take part in my research, then get in touch. I'd be more than happy to have your input.
Great. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see the results. So I'm just around management and tips for management. Andy, what's your advice? Certainly around managing remote workers.
Well, I think that there are all sorts of risks. I mean, risks of people feeling isolated. Are the right people in the right roles? You know, I do a lot of online training now, and we have sometimes this conversation, and there are some people who absolutely love working remotely. It just suits them down to the ground. They're as happy as, you know, Larry. There are other people who struggle hugely with it, not just because of their own personality, but also the working conditions, and we've touched on that. So I think if you are going to introduce that sort of hybrid version, who are the best people for the office-based stuff, the home working-based stuff, or are you going to have, you know, 2 days in the office and 3 days at home, so people get to a sort of more balanced approach? And if you're not going to do that, and again, we work with lots of companies who have a very widely distributed workforce throughout a number of countries. What the big challenge there is this sort of us and them thing. You know, this sort of clique thing appears, and it's really people working remotely not feeling to be part of the overall organisation. So I think those are challenges that people have to consider. And so how you put an effective communication strategy in place is absolutely pivotal, and you've got to make sure that you have people talking regularly, the right people in the right place at the right time, and if people are struggling, you've got a communication means to help them and to manage those concerns.
Yeah. And Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. I think one of the issues for remote working as well is how you actually motivate people as well, isn't it? And they say that to be motivated, you have to have goals in life, powerful goals that you buy into. But the thing is, who sets the goals? Is it the leader or is it the employee? And I have a nice acronym called the TIER cycle. And it's how our thinking affects our emotions, our actions, and the results that we get. Now, the problem you get sometimes in business is too often results are expected, actions given, emotions not considered, and the thinking just goes out of the window. So I think in terms of the remote working, it's almost got to exaggerate what you would do in the office, hasn't it? Because it is remote. So in terms of setting the agenda, setting the goals, and asking people, how can we help you? How can we help you better in this environment to get closer to them?
Yeah. And actually, I mean, obviously we've talked about we are talking about remote working, but with obviously the integration back into the workplace, there's a hybrid model that's suddenly become the buzzword, where businesses are having to manage staff in multiple locations, whether it be from home or from their offices in the soon-to-be future. It's actually quite interesting. We've had a question from the audience, which sort of relates to this, but this is it's regarding some. It says, "What are your thoughts about Boris's latest comments? People have had quite a few days off, and it wouldn't be a bad thing for people to see their way round to making a passing stab and getting back into the office." I think they were trying to sort of. I think what they're trying to say is that obviously there could become a cultural divide within organisations between home workers and those who are seen not in the office. What's your thoughts on that, Lynda? What's your thoughts on
that? I think I remember doing a study on home working, and with it was only 5 members of the team, and the overwhelming feedback that came back is that they all absolutely love working from home. They loved the fact that they saved on travel, saved on time, but they also missed the office, and what they would welcome was a hybrid version. And that was a few years ago. So I think we've got 2 options going forward. I think organisations, if they fast forward, the benefit of a hybrid model is huge, because I think you pick up the social aspects and the training and the kind of collaboration piece, as well as the ability to work from home and the benefits that come with that. The win-win situation from hybrid is that you could probably move to smaller buildings, because you're only ever going to have so many shifts on one day. So you can think about how that would work. But then the opposite is that people need to have the right kit around them, both in the office and both at home. That needs to be thought through. If I think we move to a model where it's either office-based or work-based, you're probably looking at something entirely different, which is probably different contracts, applicability to work from home, or contracts for people in the office. So almost to stop it becoming a them and us, you actually make that choice of which type of environment and future you want for your work, and therefore you have the right contract, which kind of dictates that.
Yeah. And where do you see some of the issues with hybrid working? I know you mentioned contracts, but particularly from a wellbeing perspective, is it?
Sorry, what do you mean?
Yeah, do you see any issues? Where do you see the issues, I suppose, from a mental health perspective of having to manage people in different areas, different workplaces?
I think it probably is a little bit more of a logistical thing to manage, but I think it's a win for well-being and mental health, given that you almost have the ability to do both. And I think if there are people who want to work in the office full time and the company wants that, then maybe you can go down that road. But I think if you allow people to mix with their team and have face-to-face contact with their leader at one point, even if it's 1 day a week, and then the other 3 or 4 days from home, then I think we're helping the kind of well-being. I think the thing we've got to get right, though, is I do think that the kind of environment that we work in and the kit that we need to do the job properly, whether it's dual screens and all of that type of thing, we need to have that set up both at the home and work if we need it to be quite a consistent experience.
Yeah. Andy, what do you think?
So are we talking about the question from the Boris Johnson quote?
Yeah, I've been throwing a few at you actually, but yeah, it's a mixture of seeing. I think how I suppose how hybrid working is going to affect the culture of an organisation.
Well, I mean, the first thing I'd say is that one of the this notion of working from home up until quite recently was that if people said I'm working from home, in many organisations it meant I was just going to go off and skive and go shopping. So there was that sort of attitude, and that's changed and shifted quite a bit. So I think remarks like Boris Johnson's doesn't really help the cause. In my experience, all the people I train and see them working at home, people are working harder at home. That's the general evidence I think coming through, and so those comments will not help that sort of us and them. If we're working in an office environment, all these people who are remote working are in some way skiving. But so, and I keep coming back to it, communication is absolutely critical. I take Lynda's point about having the right kit, but also have people got the right environment, because I have a window on the world. We all do. All of those of us training remotely, you see into other people's worlds, and I see people working in environments where they've got a sort of partner working there, obviously up with schools, only just gone back. I see people trying to homeschool, and young people around. It's been very chaotic for a lot of people working from home, and some of those environments will not be good. And the amount of conversations that I have during training sessions where somebody's working on a bed, that's the only place in the house they can get a bit of peace and quiet. Well, how are you going to run a business really properly in that environment? It's not conducive. So all of those things will need to be considered, and then how you meld and blend the workforce in the office and the workforce remotely, so that everybody is equal and valued, is such an important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's quite interesting looking at the polling questions. Obviously, there's quite a number of organisations who have joined this call, this webinar, who actually have got some kind of strategy in place. I guess a question that I'd like to ask the panelists would be, so you can have a wellbeing strategy in place, but is it effective? So what do you need to put in place to make sure your wellbeing strategy is effective? So Eileen, could you give your thoughts?
I'd love to, yeah. So measurement is my thing. And I think what I don't quite understand is why organisations wouldn't measure the impact of their investment they're making in wellbeing, when they will measure to the nth degree the impact that other strategies are having in their organisation. And because we know the evidence is crystal clear of the link between wellbeing and productivity, then really, if they need to know the investment they're making is having a direct impact on their bottom line. Otherwise, stop and do something else. So I think there's two different ways that I would really recommend measure. First off, find out what will make a difference in terms of wellbeing. Quite often, companies will put interventions into place without actually asking the employees what they want. Co-designing wellbeing programs is really quite critical. And it's amazing how many times I've had conversations with MDs saying, we've tried so many things, we've really plateaued, I don't know what to do anymore. And I'm like, well, ask your employees what they want. And I think what's very interesting around wellbeing is it's so highly personable, it's so subjective, that actually there will be a whole host of different things you can do to improve wellbeing. And if you only go down one route, you're isolating, you're excluding a lot of other people. And then the other thing is continual monitoring of the impact of your interventions, either on an intervention basis. So Andy earlier talked about the different ROIs you can have for different interventions, between 1 in 4 all the way up to sort of 1 in 10, 1 in 11. Interestingly, training on awareness of mental health, particularly at line manager level, is the one that's getting the highest ROI. So it's measuring the ROI and the impact of each of your different interventions, and then almost having a pulse of communications and monitoring of wellbeing across the entire workforce as well. The more you measure, the more, I mean, you manage what you measure what you manage, you manage what you measure, and you certainly treasure what you measure. So just measure as much as you can.
Great. Yeah. Andy, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah. So I totally agree. Measuring, you can't sort of think where you are without very, very careful measuring. So how do you do that? Well, you benchmark it. You put a questionnaire out. You anonymize it so people feel comfortable about truthful responses, and you see where the hotspots are, and that may well be around individuals. In certain departments, there are issues around that. Get working groups set up to try and evaluate what the problems are, because just to put in a massage on a Friday, a shoulder masseur coming in, if people are going crazy with the amount of work they're having to do, will not be effective. And then I think it's got to be top down. You've got to have buy-in from senior leadership, and then decide how far you want to go. Is this basic entry-level stuff? Do you just want to avoid, risk, avoid the risk of litigation and that sort of thing, or do you really want to go up to best practice? And what are your goals, and what are you looking to achieve? So I think it's a very, very wide, broad subject, but get everybody involved, get the entire workforce having their say, and total buy-in. That's a great way of going about it.
Yeah, yeah. As far as the environment, I know, Lynda, you touched upon this a little bit, but how much of an impact do you think that has on well-being?
On the actual physical environment?
Yeah, yeah.
So if we're trying to deliver consistently and support our teams in the right way, then your environment in the home and your environment in the workplace needs to match, whatever that feels like. I echo Andy's point, because I've been running lots of training and lots of Zoom training lately, and in every class, and I'm running classes every day, in every class somebody is lying on their bed, actually lying on their bed and trying to take part in a training session, because that's the only room in the house they've got, and it just doesn't work. So the sort of that environment around you needs to be right. I just want to touch on a point around, though, well-being and how integrated it is, because the other thing for me is if you get the culture right, and if you're a caring and supportive organizational culture, then well-being is just part of it. It's almost like it's not separate. It's not something we say we've got a well-being agenda and it sits over here. So in a way, I'm backing up what Eileen said around everything is integrated. But I still worry a little bit that I can think back to even my time in British Gas, thinking about the same thing. Do we just do the right thing as leaders, companies, organizations with people? People are integrated, they've got good roles, they enjoy what they're doing, they fix the business, they've got the autonomy to do the right job, they've got a good environment. Then I often wonder why we need anything called a wellbeing agenda or an employee engagement agenda or whatever else, because the culture should be right. So I still think that we've still got a way to go in creating something quite unique and special, that this is just part of the way we do business.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Okay, so Nick, just around some physical exercise and the impact on well-being of physical exercise. I know you've got obviously your sporting background and the work you've done around training athletes. Could you give us your sort of perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's a well-known saying, healthy body, healthy mind. So I think if you're physically active, it does help, but you need to be doing at least 20 minutes of exercise before you start to get benefit. But we all know that if you just go out at lunchtime for a walk for 20 minutes, a brisk walk away from the office, people say, I haven't got enough time. But the benefit you get back from that 20-minute walk is paid back by the bucket full. You come back in, the endorphins start kicking around the body, you feel good, life's changed dramatically. So I think it's really, really important, because the oxygen's flowing in the body, the blood's pumping around, and you are physically more productive. That's how athletes work, by creating, their blood flow, the oxygen, pumping the blood around the body. So I think taking the 20 minutes out at lunchtime makes a huge, huge difference, both in terms of how you feel about yourself and how productive you are in the afternoon, rather than just sitting at your desk and eating your crisps and a sandwich, etc., etc. So I recommend put that 20 minutes in your diary and make it a routine. And I'd also say sometimes we commute to work in the morning, we commute home. We don't do that now. Try to get 20 minutes in before work and 20 minutes afterwards. You'll see a huge difference.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's quite incredible the effect exercise has, and I suppose it's also getting away from your screen, just to from that perspective, help refocus you.
Hugely.
Yeah. We've got a question from the audience, from Paul. What are your views on care of duty for a company to provide a workstation to support staff working from home, and how to logistically support this due to the different domicile situations? So obviously related to hybrid. Lynda, do you want to give us your thoughts on that?
I think if we took a long-term view of this, then in the future companies will benefit with a hybrid model, without a doubt, because they'd need smaller premises, because you've got less people in. So in a work situation, in the office situation, everybody probably would need to think about moving to oh my God, I've forgotten the word for it. Hot desking type of scenario. So pretty standard desks that we would and screens and things that we would move into, that we would work in the office. And if that's the case, then companies should be able to provide investment to get the right type of workstation in the home, because longer term companies will benefit from, like I said, smaller premises, hot desking facilities, providing less support, as in, you know, all the other things that sit around support, like, you know, food in the office and machines and, you know, all of those other things. So I think long term is something we need to look into and think about supporting.
Yeah. Eileen, as you've got a standing desk, I'll ask you the question as well. What do you think?
It's interesting. There was a very, very recent piece of research done, commissioned by the Wellcome Trust, on standing desks, and not on standing desks, sorry, on movement and sitting and standing. And it's no surprise, of course, it's no surprise that you know, being able to just move makes a very, very significant difference on someone's mental capacity. I mean, as Nick was saying, you know, that break and moving, getting fresh air, it's about natural daylight, fresh air. It's actually doing an awful lot, both physically and mentally. What it does in your brain is it puts you back into stage 1 productivity. So your brain is almost going through a reset. Otherwise, if you continue into stage 2, stage 3 productivity, you're literally just deteriorating. So there's a massive reason for having a workstation that works, but also making it so that it's not static. No, I'm not advocating that everyone should now start investing in standing desks, because, you know, this was an investment I made at the beginning of lockdown, and it is easily one of the best things I've bought for my home environment. But I'm not going to forget what you said, Lynda, and both yourself as well, Andy, that constantly when we're doing meetings, training, webinars, you see people who are like slouched on a sofa. And I did training on Saturday, and I saw someone slouched on a sofa for 6 hours. Now that's bad for anyone. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate. As you can tell, I'm standing now. I always make sure that I'm up and down, as my desk is called a yo-yo. I do not have any affiliation to that company, but I'm literally a yo-yo. I'm going up and down all day.
Yeah. Well, it's good. It's good to hear that it works. So, Nick, actually, just around motivating remote workers, have you got any tips on that?
Yeah.
Because obviously it's so key. Sorry,
go on.
No, I say it's so key to make sure if people are motivated, often they're normally happy, aren't they? So the two things kind of...
Well, indeed, but I think it comes back to, you know, you can't be motivated unless you've got powerful goals in life. So it's down to the two people to come together to agree what the goals are, and then to provide the support, because it's people's individual self-talk that will determine how successful and how well they work, because we live our lives on our perceptions of reality, not reality itself, and our conditioning. And we have 70,000 thoughts that go through our brain a day, which are telling us either helpful self-talk or hindering self-talk. And I think what becomes more challenging for the manager remotely is seeing how those people are behaving mentally. Because working remotely, as people have said in the past, you can't see them at the drinks machine, etc. So it's understanding. So I think it's setting small goals, celebrating success together, being in contact more than perhaps you normally would be. And you know what's one of the sexiest things I think there is saying, please, thank you, and use of a name. And people forget the basics. Jonathan, this has been a great show. I'm so grateful. Thanks ever so much. Just doing the basics like that, honestly, just doing the basics like that makes a huge, huge difference.
Yeah. And how? What tips do you have around sort of achieving peak mental performance? I mean, we talked about.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a full-day course, but I think we live our lives. Our conditioning drives our beliefs, drives our attitudes, our feelings and emotions, and our performance. And I think you have to change your self-talk from hindering to helpful. We then start talking about affirmations, about trying to almost picturing what success is. If I was talking to an athlete, I'm going out to Kenya to work with some world-class athletes. What are you thinking about when you're on the start line? What's success going to look like? And also for the boss to the employee, I think rather than say you need to be X to target to achieve whatever, tell a story in pictures, make it real for them. What does success look like, as opposed to being a numeric number as well?
Yeah. And Andy, just around work-life balance, what's your thoughts on that? And have you got any advice?
Yeah, I think, again, picking up Eileen's point about, getting up and walking around, but and to your point as well, Nick, about take yourself out for a walk. But, one thing for people who are used to working somewhere else and commuting, that as horrendous sometimes, I mean, certainly I worked in London for many years, and, I'd never missed that commute. But what a commute does is give you time to adjust between your work life and your home life, and that's not there now, and that's for many people that's quite difficult. So there's this creep thing goes on where I'm just going to check my emails once more. That was happening anyway because it's so accessible now. But establish ground rules. Have a routine where I tend to finish my working day, take the dog out for a walk, 20 minutes or something, brisk walk. By the time I get in, I'm now in home mode, and I put the office to bed and get on with my life. And it's just having routines like that, so you're not drawn into this constant work mindset. And I think it's just simple things like that. Actually, they're not terribly difficult. But be kind to yourself. Don't drive yourself to the point where you think, I just got to be working all the time and be seen to be working all the time to justify my existence.
Yeah. And I suppose, that's part of the culture, isn't it, of an organisation as well. Just promoting good work-life balance, I suppose. And actually, it's probably a nice caveat into the next sort of part of our discussion, which is around, how do you gauge satisfaction or levels of satisfaction, and how do you develop a successful working culture? Lynda, what's your thoughts on that?
Rather than the kind of obvious around the survey and the measurements, I think you gauge the level of satisfaction by the level of discretionary effort you end up getting from people. You can just tell. You can tell good cultures. You can tell when people are really engaged. You can tell they're pushing the business forward. They're trying to find new ideas and, kind of very, very keen to get these things implemented. That's the kind of thing I would like to see from, an organization. Sorry, from people that are really engaged in organizations. I'm not the biggest fan of employee engagement measurement, but I never have been. I think sometimes when you have to measure, we're getting something wrong in the first place.
I suppose this is a question for all, which is around, what does good look like when it comes to culture? And I know that can vary because different organisations have different types of employees, ages, and demographics. But Eileen, what's your thoughts on that?
I'm going to echo something that Andy said earlier with regards to leaders being super important and how they need to role model, so that the values of the organisation are being lived and breathed and demonstrated visibly by the leaders. And I think in terms of the culture now, we know from research pre-pandemic by Gallup that there are 4 universal needs that followers have of their leaders. And interestingly enough, they're all very human needs. They're not traditionally perhaps what you would think of as leaders when we think of our sort of, up there on a pedestal leaders. So, surely now even more so, when actually life has become so much blurred, the personal elements of our life have become so blurred with work, when our leaders are literally looking in on our home life daily, we are looking for those human traits in our leaders. So surely then we need our culture to be far more human than it's ever been before.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just so sort of as we're towards the end of the session, I guess what I'd like to know is what the do's and don'ts for managing teams from afar. It'd be good to get everyone's sort of opinion on that. If you could, I'll start with Nick. Actually, what do you think?
Yeah, I think they do. One of the things we don't get is we don't get the body language, the emotional intelligence in quite the same way as we might do normally. So I think that, and also the teamship environment. So stay in regular contact. But the caveat to that is don't micromanage. There's a danger in doing so, you could actually micromanage. So I think it's engage more than ever, engage with the team, maybe even allow people some Zoom time with the teams without the leader, just to feel that sense of togetherness again. But whilst bringing everyone together is important, don't micromanage either.
Yeah. Andy, what do you think?
So it's looking at the do's, I think, of how to get it right, and communication, I think, is absolutely critical. I'd echo Nick, though, that don't overdo it, don't have too many meetings, and also maybe encourage times when it's not business focused. You just encourage people to get groups together and just talk about stuff. You can't make people do that, but that could be a helpful thing, just to facilitate that rather than to organize it. But communication for me is the critical thing. If you don't communicate effectively, if you don't set good goals for people, if you don't set the parameters around which they're working, you will run into problems, because I think also there is that that we talked about right at the beginning, this us and them culture will develop. That can happen in departments, can't it, when you're working in large groups, and marketing are all sort of set against sales and all this. It's very, very easy to happen with those lazy people working from home versus. So it's how you talk about the remote workers to the people who are in the office, and setting the benchmark there that they're not just skiving, they're working really hard. All of those things can help, and if you don't do that, you're going to have some problems potentially.
Yeah, good points. Lynda?
There's probably two tips for leaders as rather than a do and a don't. I think the two things I would say is encourage your teams, the team as a whole. We've mentioned this quite a few times around the big support network the team itself can play, and how many people, if you're in a work situation in the office, rely on the teams around them to get through the day. So I would encourage my teams to build this kind of code of collaboration, which is almost like, how are we going to work? How are we going to work? And the second thing is, as a leader, I think we all need to look inside ourselves and question ourselves whether sometimes it's the right role for us. And that might sound quite blunt. The reason I'm saying it now is I used to think it when I was in the office, and I'm not sure everyone's cut out to be a leader. But this thing Eileen said about the human element is more important than ever. And that takes some doing as a leader to be able to behave in that way, be very genuine about it, true authentic leadership, and be this new supportive sort of style of role and style of leader. And I'm just not sure everyone's cut out for that. So I think we should question ourselves a little bit.
Okay, good. Eileen?
I'm going to go back to my managers. They are critical in the well-being of their team members. So train your managers to know how to do that. But also your line managers need support too. They are, if I make the assumption, they're a sort of mid-career, they are probably at the bottom of the bell curve of well-being across the lifespan. They have huge amounts of their own responsibilities. So it's supporting the well-being of line managers so they can support the well-being of their teams.
Great, excellent. All right, well, that's brought the session to an end. Thank you all panelists for your contributions. It's been very interesting for me. I'm sure those who have listened in hopefully will have enjoyed it as much as I have. If you want to rewatch this session, we're going to post the video on our YouTube channel. So please subscribe and rewatch if you want to do that. You can access it via our website. That should be available later in the week. We will email you the details also. If you have any questions for any of our panelists, please contact myself, and I will forward your queries onto those, each of the panelists or whoever you'd like them to go to. And also, finally, there's a survey at the end. We really appreciate any feedback. Just let us know your thoughts. Areas, we could find out how we've done, and also how we could do better potentially. But yeah, thank you. Thanks for all, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.